Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring interesting and timely information to you, supporters of refugees. Whether you're a volunteer, community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who's interested in learning more, we hope that you enjoyed today's session, Community Sponsorship Group Leader, Roles and Responsibilities. Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, practitioners at resettlement agencies, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. Go on to the next slide, please. Just some housekeeping. As a reminder for everyone joining the call today, there's a control panel in your upper right-hand corner that will allow you to submit questions through the questions box. There will be ample time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. Everyone on today's webinar is automatically muted. However, if you have any technical problems, please raise your hand through the control panel and submit a question in the questions box so we can assist you. Additionally, the presentation, any resources, and a recording will be sent to everyone following today's webinar, which brings us to our presenters for today. Go ahead to the next slide. First will be myself and Brianne Casey. Brianne is Resource and Learning Manager at Refugee Welcome Collective, and myself, I'm a Technical Assistance Associate. And go on to the next slide, please. We are also going to hear sort of a panel discussion from Joan and Mark. They are on the call with us. We're really happy to have them here. And Brianne will sort of facilitate that discussion. And then, like I said, we will open it up for questions and answers at the end. Again, just as a reminder, please use the questions tab, not the chat. That's how you will submit a question. So that we can discuss later. Go ahead on to the next slide, please. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of some general principles and sort of the overall, what are the roles and responsibilities of a group leader, a community sponsorship group leader. Number one, that group leader is going to organize and lead the community sponsorship group as a whole. And we're going to go into sort of each one of these a bit. They are the primary communicator between the community sponsorship group and the resettlement staff. We'll talk about why that's important to have sort of a primary communication hub. They also provide oversight for all the paperwork and other compliance issues that arise. And then last, really an important role is just being sort of the problem solver. You know, when something is likely to go sideways every once in a while, and that person will really, think through creatively with other members of the group, with community sponsorship staff, resettlement agency staff, to figure out, okay, here's what went wrong. How do we fix it? How do we get it done? So let's go through a little bit more in detail of each one of those sort of areas. Go on to the next slide, please. So primarily, one of the main roles is to organize and lead. This person may already be in a leadership role already as part of, a church group or a local nonprofit organization. Perhaps they're already, the lay leader of the group, or perhaps they're a associate rabbi, or any number of different sort of roles. Perhaps they're the student president of the student organization. They're already in a role of leadership, but not necessarily. It doesn't have to be the case. They may, in fact, just be kind of the most enthusiastic and the person with the most availability. They were perhaps the one that kind of really got everyone interested and followed up and asked all the questions in the beginning and all of that kind of stuff. So they don't have to already be in a position of leadership, but perhaps they are now as the lead of their community group. They need to be able to model appropriate boundaries. This is important, and we can kind of talk more in details or perhaps through discussion. but you know, this is really, sorry, my dog, of course. They really do, you know, need to have appropriate boundaries between, you know, within the group themselves, for the group, between the group and the client that they're working with, as well as you know, between the group as a whole and the resettlement staff as well. Having appropriate boundaries is important. They need to be able to delegate to others, right? The lead of the group cannot do everything themselves. They will get burned out very quickly. They have to be able to rely on their other team members. We generally, you know, recommend having a committee leaders. You know, perhaps there's a housing committee as part of the group. Perhaps there's a school enrollment committee, cultural orientation, employment and finance, stuff like that. They're going to need to rely on other members of their team, and they're going to need to delegate those responsibilities too. And then obviously they need to be great at communication. They need to be good communicators who are patient and clear in their communication. We'll talk more about communication. Go ahead to the next slide, please. They are the communication hub between community sponsorship group and the resettlement staff. And what I mean by that is there is no way, and it will get very frustrating for everyone, if every member of the team is trying to text or call the community sponsorship, the resettlement staff at the office. It is much better to have those committee structures, to then have, you know, the lead of the housing committee then communicate what the top, you know, priority is, and communicate that to the group leader, so that the group leader, or maybe a co-leader, that's totally fine too, can then communicate that information clearly to the resettlement staff. So when it comes to logistics of, okay, so who's going to go pick up the key to the apartment before the clients arrive? Who's going to actually, you know, deliver the furniture that was all collected? Who's, you know, and then what time are they going to go? And then how are they going to get it back? And who's going to deliver? And who's going to move things once stuff's there? You know, it is not, it just doesn't work to be able to, you know, to have a lot of different people, you know, emailing or texting at different times. It needs to be a clear hub. So we encourage that. The importance of clear and consistent and organized communication. Obviously, it's not going to work if someone is not very communicative. You know, that they're not checking in to see kind of what the next step might be, you know, or what needs to happen next. We encourage, you know, organized communication. So perhaps regular communication, maybe checking in at least once a week and making sure that, you know, here are the, you know, most important 1, 2, 3 items that we really need to get across. There's no way you can get all of the information that might need to be communicated over the long haul. You can focus on the short term, and you can start thinking about some of the long-term stuff, like what happens after month 3, but you can't possibly think through all the possibilities, and you can't possibly have those, you know, communications all in one big lump. It needs to be consistent throughout the welcome sort of journey. And then I will say it again as many times as I possibly can. Patience, compassion, kindness go a long way in terms of smoothing out those communications. Go ahead to the next slide, please. They also serve as providing oversight to a lot of important paperwork, right? And this might be an MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, or commitment forms. They're the ones making sure that the group members have their background checks completed, any trainings that were required, that they've gone through that, any other policies that they need to have signed, and agreement forms, that kind of thing. So they're the sort of central hub for and making sure that the community group has all of that stuff completed. They also may likely be responsible for funds, for the money. They don't have to be. Certainly you could have a sort of, you know, chief financial officer of the group, perhaps, you know, who's sort of responsible for all of the money that's been raised and who's going to keep track of the checks and that kind of thing. But the group leader should definitely be very much involved in it if they're not leading the actual sort of, financial responsibility stuff. They need to be really kept up to date, make sure that the overall stuff is all completed. And then other compliance issues like the core service delivery documentation, making sure that if you help the client go apply for SNAP benefits for food stamps, or something like that, that they've completed that, and that any kind of paperwork or a copy of the application or things like that is completed, perhaps with case notes or any receipts. You took the client to Walmart and bought them some clothes and some other household items. You need record of that stuff. And so again, the group leader is responsible for that. They can certainly delegate some of those responsibilities out, but should be sort of the main person that the buck stops with them, really, in terms of making sure that it's complete. Go ahead to the next slide. And then really, an extremely important part is just being the overall problem solver. Be prepared as much as you can, but know that problems will they will arise. There will be problems throughout this journey. So be prepared, but then recognize that it's going to happen. So when it does, that's when you kind of step in as the group leader to go ahead and help problem solve. Figure out, okay, so what exactly needs to happen? The client never got their EAD card, their employment authorization card. So we're waiting. We can't apply for a job. The client can't apply for the job without having that employment authorization card. So what do we have to do? Who's going to email the resettlement staff member? What does the resettlement staff member recommend? Okay, we have to email this other party to check on it to see if maybe it arrived somewhere else. Where is it in the process? Do we need to reapply? So kind of thinking through as a problem arises what they can do. Also, being willing to ask for help, but also make sure that you've tried it yourself first. So in those ways, absolutely be willing to ask for help, but also make sure that you've done your own research. Is it something that you could have Googled yourself to figure out what the address of the Social Security office was? Did you really need to ask for help for that, or could you have done some of the work up front to make sure to figure out if you could have figured it out yourself? But if you really can't, you've tried, you spent the time, then absolutely be willing to ask for help and make sure that you communicate that clearly. Hey, we ran into this problem. We thought we had it figured out. We didn't. Can you please help us, figure out how to solve this problem? And then last, I'll just say, again, I can't say it enough. Be patient, be flexible, be compassionate with yourself, with others around you, the other members of your group, with the clients themselves, and certainly with the staff too. Everyone is stressed. Everyone doesn't have a lot of time. I know it's hard. It can be absolutely difficult. But have some patience. Understand that it hopefully eventually will get worked out. So that's really it for that. I hope that kind of gives you all a bigger perspective on kind of the general roles. And then I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Brianne. You can go ahead on to the next slide, and I will pass it on to Brianne.
Yeah, thanks so much, Derek. So that's a good overview. Thanks, Derek, for the information about some roles and responsibilities of team leaders. I also want to say, I know that we always get a pretty good national, attendance from on these calls. And actually, Mark and Joan, who are going to speak here in a minute, are for different places as well. So I just wanted to note that we're sharing some best practices and roles for leaders, but that also this varies, across the country and depending on the organization that you're working with. So you can also kind of reach out and check with the folks that you're collaborating with as far as any specific team leader roles and responsibilities for your particular context or what have you. But like I said, those are some, general roles and responsibilities. And now I'm excited to hear from some people who are or have been leaders themselves, just to share their lived experience. And I think that we're going to glean some good information and advice from both Joan and Mark. Let me see. So Joan and Mark have both been team leaders, and I'm going to let them kind of do a little bit more of an extended introduction of themselves here. We'll start with Joan. Joan, if you could just tell us kind of what got you involved, some of the local organizations that you're working with, what families or individuals you've welcomed, and yeah, I guess where they were from and when they arrived. But yeah, we're interested to hear a little bit more about you, Joan.
Well, thank you. I'm a member of the local Rotary group, and some of us were sort of chatting about, isn't it awful what's happening in Afghanistan? And is there anything that we can do? We found out that Catholic Charities of Central and Northern Missouri are the group in this area who work with Afghan refugees. So we contacted them, and initially they said, oh, we're too small, we won't get any. And a couple of weeks later, we got a call that said, we're getting some. So we initially found a large duplex that was donated by a local fraternity, the use of it, and thought we could handle a couple of families. Got a call that we had a family of 13, and could we adapt? And we could. We opened some doors and made a duplex into a single family. So our first family initially had 11 children. We now have 12 in the family. And we got them settled in October. Then we got a call that his brother was on the way, and could we handle him on Veterans Day, when everything in terms of property management was closed. But we did find one who would answer our phone and rent us an apartment, so then we had two families. Shortly after that, we got a call. There were two more families, and we were feeling fairly confident at that point, so we said, sure, why not? In retrospect, we were a little bit overwhelmed, but we managed. Adapting is a good word. We managed to adapt and make things work. There is a fifth family that is not under our direct supervision or sponsorship, but are being sponsored by a local family, and they've sort of become part of the group. So we had a total of 5 families, 2 of whom have felt comfortable enough with this country that they have moved to be closer to their own families. We've noticed that when Afghan families first immigrated, they were dispersed to whoever had room for them. And they have kept track of each other, and one of our families moved to Nebraska and one to California. So we now are working with a total of 3 families. I haven't counted how many, but they are families of 9, 14, and 6, I think, is the smallest family. We realized early on that Rotary couldn't handle this. It's a huge project. So we involved people from all over the community, lots of church involvement, lots of teacher involvement, some medical people, a former dispatcher has been essential to what we're doing. We've tried to find people who had the skills that we thought that we needed or discovered that we needed, and people have been very responsive. So things are going well when none of the kids are in the emergency room this week, or there are no crises that we're dealing with on a current basis. But that's always temporary. Something is always coming up that that we're trying to find a solution for. So it's exciting, it's terrifying. It's something I never thought I would do. There are actually 3 people as sort of co-leaders of this group. All of us are retired from something. I'm a retired social worker and realtor. One is a retired public defender and judge, and the third is a retired psychology professor. So we have different contacts all over town, all of which we've called on, and all of which have responded very positively to this.
Yeah, no. And it sounds like you had some good initiative and problem solving, like Derek said. And then it's amazing how you all have adapted, to expand the group. Mark, could you share a little bit about your group out there in California and kind of what led you to get involved and the families or individuals you all are welcoming?
Sure. So I have a long background with refugees. I've been working in the field for over 30 years, and part of my experience was I was a vice president with the International Rescue Committee, and I led their advocacy and policy office in Washington, D.C., and so worked on the Hill on advocating for refugees. And after that, I ended up working in the Obama administration as the director of the Office of U.S. Foreign Disaster Assistance. And it's really that work that has convinced me, and the work I've been doing since on climate change and international disasters, that's led me to see a really, really difficult, even more difficult picture emerging in terms of the life of refugees, who is a refugee, and what we're facing in a warming planet. When I was in Washington, I was, very pleasantly surprised by how bipartisan refugee policy was. Back in the early 2000s and the 90s, early 2000s. And unfortunately, that's changed. And the estimates are from 150 million to as many as 500 million climate. I won't call them refugees because there's no policy yet that's been identified to help them, but this is coming, and it's going to merge with our refugee program. I have no doubt of that. So I think that to the extent that the public can engage in this and get involved and show that Americans support continued robust policies, especially after what happened during the previous 4 years and really decimating the program, I think it's absolutely critical. And right now we're very much, as everyone on this call knows, in a rebuilding phase. So to do my small part and also to get a better understanding, I've worked with a number of families over the years, but never in a formal way. And I'm married to a refugee, so that's a formal way. But I wanted to see from a very ground level perspective how the process is working with the new sponsorship options that are out there. So I got together with another couple of people, a group here in the San Francisco Bay Area. We were about 15 people, and we had one family about a month after our organization formed that we thought we were going to work with, but they ended up taking a different track. So it's been almost 3 months before we finally got a family to work with. And we now have a large family that we're working with, although I bow to Joan and the number she's been dealing with. And the problems that I faced as a leader of this is my co-lead had to drop out due to some serious life issues. And there was some other attrition related to those kinds of things. As Joan said, and you guys have said, adaptability is key. We had about 15 people at one point, I think, and some of those signed up just to be donors. About 7 or 8 of those signed up to have hands-on work with the family. And now we're down to about 4. We do have a U.S. tie for this family, and that's been extremely helpful to have somebody that's been here a few years and knows the situation, exceedingly helpful. We're only about a little over a week into working with this family, and certainly there's endless challenges, including housing here in the Bay Area. Also, I'm finding it really interesting. The father of the family we're working with speaks English very well. He's is an SI, special immigrant visa case, and had worked with the U.S. government. And I'm finding it very difficult to assess what to look for him in terms of jobs. He has an amazing amount of experience, but that obviously it's the chicken and the egg situation where you're trying to figure out what should their budget be for housing, and you don't know where they're going to end up in the job market. So these are the kinds of challenges you face. And I'm trying to work with my group a bit like a board of directors almost, in trying to identify their special skills and how they can help, contacts they can use to network for the family. And it's, as Joan said, it's challenging.
Yeah, no, right.
Rewarding.
Making the plans, but factoring in for uncertainty, right? So,
Yes,
so yeah.
exactly. And factoring in worst case, because you have
Yeah.
to do that. What if they really have to start from scratch, which they are obviously in many ways, but if their job prospects aren't what you might think, which, I'm preparing them for that as well, that they really have to be flexible.
Yeah, no, very good. And actually, if you all don't mind, you spoke a little bit about your motivations, so I'm going to skip ahead here. I'm kind of curious, like Joan, with you talking about how things have changed, so then your group expanded, right? And then Mark, with you as well, I'm sure you've, over the years sent a lot of emails about refugee issues, but something tells me that some of these emails, like Derek said, might be about furniture or housing, or maybe a little bit different. So I'm hoping, I guess we'll start with Joan again. Could you tell me a little bit about how your group works as far as communication, like among your team? I think you mentioned you were working with Catholic Charities, how you communicate with them, how you communicate with these, I think you're currently working with 3 families, is it? But how you communicate with the families as well. We'll take any advice you can give us, Joan.
Well, we have a WhatsApp group for sort of the nitty-gritty of, can someone pick up so-and-so and take her to the doctor?
And I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. But can you tell just like a real quick explanation of what WhatsApp is for those who may not know?
Well, I had never heard of WhatsApp before this. It is some kind of phone-based communication. The person who was knowledgeable about it created it and invited the members or the volunteers. And it allows us to post something on this app, and it goes to the phones of all the people who are in the WhatsApp group. So it's a phone communication system. And I see Derek nodding his head, and he is, yeah, he knows what it is. Probably anyone younger than I know knows what it is. We also have a Facebook page, which is a little more public, and it is for local people who just want to keep informed of what is going on. And so we'll announce things like, well, we had a baby this week, and so we announced it on the Facebook page. Or we'll make an announcement that we took all the ladies on a shopping trip to Joann's Fabrics and spent some donation money on fabric that will turn into beautiful dresses. Just something to keep people interested, to keep our efforts sort of in the front of their mind. I'll also post things like, we could really use a freezer. Does anybody have a freezer? Or one of the kids received an award at school, and so we posted that. Just things that we think would be of interest to the larger community as a whole. I spend a lot of time on the phone with many different people, and sometimes it's to brainstorm, sometimes it's to talk down, calm down, dealing with whatever the current crisis might be. We try to communicate as much as we can. I'm thinking of starting just sort of a monthly, as in person as we can do in the age of COVID, just, a sharing of what we are doing and what we are working on, and what the education group is doing, what the transportation group is doing, what the healthcare group is doing, just so that we know what is happening. And we probably don't do half of what we should.
I think probably whatever works. And I think it's interesting just how you were saying, like, you've got the WhatsApp group, which is like an app that you can download on your phone or what have you, which is probably like some of the more detailed, right, information between your team. And then I like the, yeah, some people do like Facebook pages. I like what you were saying about kind of like coordinating, maybe support from others and communicating with potential donors. And I'm sure people out there thinking about making a Facebook page, just getting the consent and agreement from any refugees that you're working with too. Yeah, and then like you were saying, maybe I have heard some people say that the monthly meeting is a very, kind of like helpful structure as well. Let's see, Mark, you're like a week in, but what has worked well for your team as far as communication goes?
Well, we've done several Zoom calls, and just keeping people engaged, I think, is critical, and giving them updates on where we were at as we awaited the arrival of the family. And now that they're here, we're obviously engaging more frequently, and we've got our agreement form with the various tasks outlined, and we've divvied up who's going to do what and sort of a timeline for getting these various tasks done. There are, it leads you into so many myriad different types of things you're dealing with, as you mentioned, from furniture to phone communications, all these things that they need to have set up. And we're well on our way on that. One of the challenges we face here in the Bay Area is that the family is in temporary housing right now, and the distances can be great. So working that out as well in terms of figuring who might be in the area and be able to stop by, and who has a truck, who can do what. But I think the communications have been going fairly well. We're working with the International Rescue Committee and working with their staff to make sure that we understand the funding that is available, and then matching that with our own contributions to see how we can best launch them.
Great. Let's see, and we are going to open this up to participant questions here as well in a minute. But I guess any thoughts? I'm sure we might get some questions. But just general advice, maybe something you wish that when you were getting started, what you would advise to another person who's thinking about maybe becoming a team leader, or who is just starting as a team leader. And actually, Mark, maybe we'll switch it up. We'll go back to you, and then we'll let. I saw Joan smile too. Something tells me she has some good some good advice to add. But Mark, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I think it's no doubt due to my long history in nonprofit organizations, but I've sort of approached this as if this group is a bit of a board of directors, and we have some that are active board members who'll be working directly with the family, and others who are more a board of overseers, but it could be critical in terms of their networks and potentially finances as well. And making sure that both those groups remain engaged, remain enthusiastic, giving them updates on what's happening. We did a Zoom call last night with the father of the family, because several people haven't been able to meet them yet, so they could actually get eyes on the prize in terms of the people we're working with. And that, I think, was great. People really appreciated that. So I think it's being adaptive, using whatever skills you may have to try to come up with a plan that can best serve the family you're trying to help.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and Joan, what advice, if I were going to get just about to get started or thinking about being a team leader or not, what advice would you give me?
Well, I definitely contact anybody in the area who's done it or is doing it. We were the first in this area, and so we've been stumbling blindly, but we managed to figure some things out, so we might be of some value to somebody. And then just get as wide a variety. Reach out to people that you don't normally associate with. We spoke to any public group who would listen to us, and so we talked to service groups. We talked to the retired teachers, which has been an enormous asset. I talked to a service sorority, and got folks from each of those organizations who were interested in participating. So the wider the base, I think, the better, because you are going to develop needs that no matter what your own background is, you're not going to be able to figure out. And, you know, I'll need to talk to a healthcare professional to find out what do we need to do with these folks who've had no dental or regular medical care in their lives. Reach out to educators. What do these kids who've never been in a classroom, who've literally never tried to write something down, and who have no English, how do we approach them? And the school system has been enormously supportive. Has hired ESL teachers specifically for these kids. The response from the community has been very, very positive. I was a little worried about it. Small towns can have a reputation as being sort of isolated, insular, and we've not had any difficulty with that so far, knock on wood. Overall, the response has been very, very positive. And just mind that for all you can get.
Yeah, no, I like that, you know, like the emphasis on, you know, team leaders, and all of the welcomers, everyone on your team, you know, just that role of like connection, right? That these families, you know, like may or may not be in that community for years to come, but you're kind of there at the beginning to connect them to those English teachers and connect them to some of the folks with this expertise. That all sounds great. Let's see, Derek, I'm not sure if we've had any additional questions come in. If not, I'm sure that we could keep going.
Yeah, I want to sort of remind everyone, it does look like we have a couple, but so we're now going to move towards the question and answer section. So as a reminder, you still can submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. And I will go ahead and read one or two here, and hopefully we'll get a couple more. If not, I have a follow-up question or two for everyone. So first, someone asked, will the slides be available after the webinar? And yes, they will. If you registered for this webinar, you will receive a copy of the video of this, as well as the slides too, to share. So happy to do that. Someone was asking Joan, they missed where you were from or where you are located. Do you mind sharing that with them?
I am from Fulton, Missouri.
Excellent. And like you said, a small town. Someone is asking, as a sponsorship group, how do you balance supporting the family through donations and additional sort of hands-on support, but also setting boundaries so that clients achieve the goals of self-sufficiency, to be sure they don't rely on, don't rely too much on volunteer aid and can feel comfortable navigating life in the US on their own. So yeah, could you all talk a little bit about that in terms of finding a good balance between offering help, support, your time, your effort, transportation, providing transportation perhaps, providing funding for that support, but also balancing that overall the clients are working towards self-sufficiency, and so that you're essentially working yourselves out of a job, out of a volunteer job, supporting them eventually. So what does that look like for you all?
Mark, do you want to?
Sure. Sure. So it's an excellent question, and it's one we face on the international side of this as well as doing family resettlement. I've dealt with governments who, Turkey as an example, in the early days of the Syria crisis, they were just incredibly generous with refugees, and I tried to have conversations with them about how it just isn't sustainable, and the idea is to make this as sustainable as possible, the program. And the same is true with families. And you know, what I've done with the group is to make that clear that our job is to make them self-sufficient. and that if we go overboard in terms of what we're trying to help them in the short term, that could actually be detrimental in the long term. And one of the things I've done with the family, I mentioned this a minute ago, is that I've said, you know, we're going to hope for the best, but we're going to plan for the worst in terms of your job prospects. And that's going to have implications for the type of housing you're in, for everything. And it's better to start small and you know, have good luck and then be able to transition into something new than to get something you simply can't afford, or be receiving gifts and benefits that just won't be sustainable over the long term. So I think it's a really good question, and I think it's just, again, it's all an unknown when a family first arrives, and you want to keep their morale up, and you want to say you know, things that are positive, but you also want to be realistic. And it's such a culture shock, especially we're both working with families from Afghanistan, and I spent enough time over there to know what it's like. And when they come to the United States, it's definitely a large culture shock, and there are often misconceptions about life in America and explaining how things work, both the nitty gritty of it and the positive aspects of it. So I think just taking that kind of a track where you plan for the worst but hope for the best is the most appropriate way to move forward.
You know, it's good strategy.
Well, and in a small town, people tend to be more involved with each other than perhaps in a larger city. But we also tend to be maybe not as wealthy as some folks in larger cities. So the financial independence is important to both groups, both the sponsors and the refugees, simply because we may not have as many financial assets as a larger city. And so we've said from early on that what we want to do is give them a start financially, and that has been, you know, apartments or houses furnished with used whatever, bicycles that they can use to get around this relatively small community, introductions to neighbors or to other families, other refugee families who've been in the area for a longer period of time. And then the support, I guess we envision that going on, well, for much longer than 6 months or a year. Our families don't speak English, don't read and write English. And so we've started English classes, and we concentrate on things that they need on a daily basis. We've concentrated on, you know, this is who you go to for your health care. This is who you go to for WIC card. So we've tried to introduce them to community resources that they can use without our intervention. They can use it on their own. One of the families, when I ask you, what do you want to do about this? And here are your options. What he will say, well, you decide. And I say, no, I'm not the father. You are the father. You make decisions for your family. I can help you with, these are your options. These are some good points, some bad points, but you are the father and you have to make decisions. And sometimes he makes the decision that I would have made, and sometimes he doesn't. And we have to respect that. So yeah, there is a danger almost of over involvement. And I keep reminding folks, this is like when you send your kids off into adulthood. You know, you hope that they have the tools and the resources, and then you have to stand back and hold your breath until they can do it on their own. And that's what we're all working for.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments about you know, this really is you know, the client's choice, and that, you know, encouraging them, and like you said, sometimes they make decisions that you agree with, sometimes they make decisions that you disagree with, but in the end they are fully capable of making their own decisions for themselves and what they believe is right for themselves and their family. Appreciate those. We often talk in sort of the community sponsorship realm in terms of moving from, in the beginning, perhaps a relationship of doing for, but then eventually moving to teaching how, you know, and really because it's a lot easier, it's quicker to just call the doctor's appointment and say, hey, it's just easy, I can just do this for you. It's harder, it takes more time to teach them how to call the doctor's office and ask for an interpreter and try to, you know, solidify an actual appointment or something like that. But far more important for them long term to be able to do that. So anyway, really appreciate those comments. We do have some more questions, so we're going to keep going. We tend to end right around this time, but if it's okay, we'll go for another five or so minutes. Someone has a question. What was the biggest challenge for organizing your team? Were there any particular challenges in terms of trying to organize your team?
Joan, go ahead. I'll follow.
Well, we've experienced some attrition due to health or family issues. So when, you know, things have been going well and then someone gets ill or has a family obligation, we've had to work around that a lot. But we always seem to have someone stepping up to fill a void. We originally had a woman who was sort of the leader, and she developed some medical issues, and so she had to step back, and that's kind of when I stepped up my role. So again, it's just a matter of flexibility and adaptation. Whenever you think things are going smoothly, that is a very temporary feeling.
Yeah, I would concur. We've had the same issues, and I think for some people that this may be a first, never having worked with refugees, it can be a little overwhelming, and you know, our vernacular, the bureaucracy, people can get worried that this is just going to be too much of a time sink for them. And I think trying to allay those fears and saying, you know, we don't want to be the perfect to be enemy of the good here. And there was a past president of IRC who liked to say that our job is to take these families from the INS to the IRS in 6 months. And I've used that with the family. Say, you know, you're gonna see, you'll be paying taxes, but the key is getting housing, you know, reasonable housing and jobs so that you can support yourselves. You know, the element that Joan mentioned, where it sounds like some of your families, there's not one English speaker, that really does add significantly to the challenge. We're fortunate that we at least have one. You know, I think being able to manage in that regard is more complex, but also there's greater needs there with the family. So it's even more rewarding, I think, to bring them through that real huge language challenge. And with children, I know this from many families I've worked with, it's absolutely amazing how quickly they pick up on language and culture and the transitions that they're able to make. And that's something that, you know, I've stressed with families I've worked with is it's oftentimes very difficult for parents, especially sometimes when parents come in with high level degrees, and they're not able to employ those in the US. But, you know, the emphasis has to be on their children, which, as I said, I've been doing this for a long time. In almost every case, I've seen families just flourish from the next generation. And ultimately, I think that's what most parents, that's why they're here, to escape whatever they were facing and to give their children a better life. So I think focusing on that when times get tough is something that's very important.
Wonderful. We'll just do one more because there were a bunch of questions that kind of came in at the last minute. So what's your recommendation for, or any sort of good recommendations for communicating with caseworkers and other resettlement staff? So just how do you see that role for you all, and what kind of good recommendations do you have for group leaders communicating with caseworkers or other resettlement staff?
We've been really lucky in that our caseworker is someone who immigrated from Afghanistan about 13 years ago and has been here and has become part of our community. And so when this all started back in October, he was hired by Catholic Charities as a caseworker. So it's someone that we already know well, communicate, I think, sometimes daily, sometimes multiple times per day. So we've been very lucky, and to have him as an interpreter has been beyond value. We could not do this without him.
Well, and I'll just say, and some of this is supposition because I don't have recent practical experience with it, but it just seems inevitable to me that given what's gone on in this field over the last 5 years, agencies are just slammed. There really has to be a lot of patience because, you know, we had Afghanistan, now we have Ukraine, and the burdens on agencies that lost so many staff are overwhelming. So, you know, I'll be very frank and say that people will have to do probably more in many cases than they may have expected because of that fact. But the knowledge that the agencies have in terms of how all this works is invaluable. And Joan's certainly very fortunate to have somebody they're working well with there. And I'm working well with IRC, I think, because of my background there. But I expect that for many people, it's going to be a bit frustrating, to be frank. But that's the nature of where we're at. If you knew what happened over the last several years, it's inevitable. And the information is within those agencies, and the will to do the right thing is there. So it'll happen, but it just may take a little longer than normal.
Thank you both so much, and thank you to everyone in you know, attending today and for their questions. And I'm sorry we can't even get to all of them. I really appreciate everyone's interest in this. I want to thank our speakers, Mark and Joan, as well as Brianne. Appreciate you being here. Thanks again to everyone for attending today's RWC Lunch and Learn. If you have any other questions, please contact info@refugeewelcome.org. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to view a recording of today's webinar, as well as descriptions for upcoming RWC Lunch and Learns. On behalf of Refugee Welcome Collective, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.